but it's the only way you're ever gonna learn. You look back and it's all in the past. I'm dwelling on the thoughts I cannot say to you. If I don't say the words, then maybe it's not true. And it feels alright when they come and say to you.
Good morning, welcome to NUFC Matters. It's me, Steve Wraith, and just giving you your Eddie Howe press conference review. Of course, Eddie was in front of the press yesterday, and the interview can be seen on Newcastle United's official channels. But as always, I'll give an assessment of who asked the questions, why they asked the questions, and what kind of mood Eddie was in. And first up, as always, was Reza from BBC Radio Newcastle, who asked him how he was feeling emotionally after last week's cup final defeat. And he basically said that he was bruised on Sunday and Monday. He said, but he had to quite quickly refocus on the game this weekend against Manchester City. On hindsight, just looking back at the game, he said that, there was passion, there was motivation, but it just, it wasn't at the highest levels. He said he carries a lot of memories from last weekend. He said there was a lot of passion and love from the supporters. But he says the desire to win something for the fans has increased, and essentially it is burning deep inside, so there will be, more days like that, I think, is, what he was trying to say. And, he can't wait to put things right, starting hopefully today. He was also asked, with regards to injuries, and he said, he touches on it later on when people ask the questions, but he was, he said that Bruno was okay, that he was in short-term pain last weekend when he went off, but he's been all right, and there's no fresh injuries to report, which basically means that Emil Kraft is probably the only person who was unavailable for selection today. He was asked whether the players, were the same as him with regards to their emotions as well. And he said, yeah, the players have been pretty much the same. They're refocused on the Manchester City game now. He said it affected, a few of the new players. Maybe he's not the locals as much, but, he just said everyone was refocused and ready to go. Reza then said, look, Man City away, you've got to be at your best. He said, look, we've had a difficult run of games. Obviously, Liverpool, Manchester United last weekend in the Cup, and now Manchester City. He admitted that the team itself has stalled. He said that we need to reignite things. He said, looking back, the Cup final was a big distraction. And ultimately we essentially want to to finish high as possible, and that's our job now, focus on these last 15 games. He was asked about Anthony Gordon, saying essentially that, he now has a big part to play. Obviously he was unavailable to play in the cup final because he was cup tied, and he said that Anthony's been working very hard in the background. He was short on high end fitness when he first came in, but obviously the last few weeks has seen him improve that, and from his perspective, he's going to be a big player in the run into the season. Keith Downey was next up from Sky, again just focusing on how the players were and asking if they were okay, and he said it's slightly longer process for the players to recover from a defeat in a cup final, but he says we've tried to get the message across that you haven't got time to sit and wallow in self-pity. You've got to push on and concentrate on the games ahead. He was asked whether the fans had surprised him, and he went, not at all. We never take the fans for granted, but we know we're privileged to have this kind of fan base. He said the Trafalgar Square scenes, he'd seen them on social media. He'd heard from some of the players' family members, how excited they were going into the cup tie. He said just them going and tidying up. He says, after being in Trafalgar Square speaks volumes for our support. And he says driving into the ground, something I was lucky enough to see, actually, seeing the bus arrive as we were queuing to get in. He just said, that in itself, just seeing the passion of the supporters as we're going into the ground, he says it certainly has left a lasting impression on me. As for Keith's next question, he was asking about Isak. He just said, look, he looked good as an impact sub. How important is he going to be in the next 15 games? And he went, yeah, he's going to be a huge player, as is Anthony Gordon. He says Isak's like a new signing. He still said that he's probably not as fully fit as he would like him to be, not at his optimum level. That was what he actually said. But he was delighted with his performance and ultimately feels that from his perspective, that he's going to play a big part in the running, which was good. He was also asked about Pope and Dubravka coming back, and he went, yeah, they're both available, and asked how important Karius was going to be. And he was sniffing a bit, I think, Keith, to see whether Karius' performance last season would have elevated him into the top 2 keepers. He just said, look, he's an important part of the squad and he's a valued member of the squad. But I took that, I've got to be perfectly honest, to suggest that Dubravka and Pope will be 2 and 1 respectively. Ownership was on Keith's agenda next. And he said, have you been reading the stories? Have you been seeking assurances after some of the stories have been in the press that Newcastle are going to be under investigation? Eddie gave him short shrift on that and just said, look, I've not given it any time, really. I've been focused on the Manchester City games. He was then asked by Keith, have you spoken to the owners this week? And he went, yeah, look, there's regular engagement with the owners, and it's as simple as that, So that was the first question, of course, about this ongoing Saudi story, which has hogged the headlines over the last few days. Andy Sixsmith was next up. He asked him, how do you process the defeat? He said, do you go home and do you sit and watch it with your family? Which Eddie laughed at. He went, yeah, I pull the kids in and watch it back. He went, no. He said, from my perspective, he said, I tend not to get too high when results are going well or too low when results aren't going well. He says, of course, after a game, after a defeat like that, he says, he says, after all games, I'm eager to watch the game back. He said, I watched it back on Sunday. He said, because I need to have answers to myself as to why we lost the game, and I need to see evidence. He says, it takes me a long time to do that process, but that's how he copes with it. And then obviously speaks to the players or the group as a whole, and tries to put things right for the next game. He said, what do you learn and what do players learn from a defeat like that? And what do they learn from your feedback? And he said, well, I try to give them my feedback, and I like to say, when things have gone well, I'll highlight it. When things have gone badly, I highlight it. And he says, so we can move on together. I have those discussions. Again, he reiterated person to person or as a group. He commented about the cup final again, just to Andy, saying that he felt that midfield was probably our strongest area, and the centre of the park we did rather well, so he was quite pleased with that. Andy again asked about the supporters, highlighted the fact that with minutes left and Newcastle losing 2-0, the fans spontaneously started waving the flags, and he said, how important is that kind of gesture to the fans? And he went, he said, look, it was important. I'm very proud of the supporters. He said there's a feeling of unity, and we're going to need that going into the second half of the season. Andy then mentioned Amanda Stabley's interview where after the game she said that we're going to win everything: the Carabao Cup, the FA Cup, the league, the Champions League. And I asked what he thought of that. He just said, look, I love Amanda's positivity. And, I love that kind of outlook. He said, from my perspective, of course, there's no time limit. And he said, I do feel sometimes, short-term time limits can build pressures and unnecessary pressures. So, yeah, he didn't diss the fact that she'd come out and said that. He just said, there's no time limit to that. Expectations have to be measured, I guess, is where he's looking at. Andy come up with a stat as well, 6 goals with an XG of 13 goals. He said, will goals come in this team? And he went, I am a believer in stats to a degree, but it's not a guide to form. He says it evens itself out, and it certainly has done over the last few games. But he says, I just hope that the swing to more positive results and stats will happen soon. And he also said, he asked him if he'd set a blueprint, with Man City. Was Man City a blueprint for Newcastle United's owners? Was that discussed when he first came in? He went, no, definitely not. We've got our own blueprint, and it would be wrong for us to discuss, that as well. We don't know what they can and can't do, and that's essentially it, really. He touched on the Man City game as well at the start of the season. He said it was a brilliant game. We were 3-1 up. We're disappointed. Maybe there could be a different approach today. So a hint there that maybe we might see Newcastle not go on the offensive today. Nisha was next up on BBC. Basically said when the game at St James's Park was such a free flowing game, and 3-3, great result at the start of the season despite being 3-1 up. Is Man City away a different prospect? And he went, yeah, because it's away from home. He said, some people will say there's a pitch, there's a ball, there's 11 against 11. He said, but it's a different moment as well in the season. He says, our principles will never change. We need to defend well, and we need to provide a threat. Nisha then asked, is the confidence still there that was there, during the unbeaten run, prior to the last few games? And he went, yeah, I think it is. He says, but confidence is fragile. And he says, I mentioned that a few weeks ago. And he said, it's my job to protect the players. He says, the last few games have really been confusing because ultimately we feel like we've put the performances in and played well. We just haven't got the results we felt we deserved. And, the failure to score goals has been an issue. She asked about ASM and said, he excites the supporters, gets fans out of their seat. Has he grasped the opportunities in the last 3 games that you've given him to gain a regular slot in the team? Again, he's not going to give anything away, is he? He just said, look, it depends on his performances in training and in games. He's that kind of player. But he insisted that he's got no issue with ASM, and that, he's worked hard with him in recent weeks, and he continues to put that effort in, then he's going to be an important player in the running. Each of them moved on to the ownership situation and the headlines surrounding the Saudi ownership. She asked, how easy is that for you to ignore? How easy is that for the players to ignore? And he just, again, reiterated that that's not his job. His job is to train players and get the best results from the players that he's got. And he said, from his perspective, if you deviate from that, if I deviate from that, he said, I'm wasting energy which could be utilized in doing the job I'm paid to do. So again, a swerve of that question. Nisha pushed it a little bit and just said, look, if you wanted to ask about the ownership and the headlines that have been generated this week, could you? And he went, look, channels of communication are always open. Damien was next, and he was pushing really the Saudi agenda, and he was asking about the message from the club, and how that had been portrayed. And could you, if you wanted to ask the club about it, could you? And he went, and do you have the details? He was pushing it a lot, Damien, and he just said, look, I believe. He turned to the PR guy at the club and just said, I believe there's a statement out there. And he went, yeah, there's a statement out there from Amanda. And Amanda had spoken, of course, this week and come out and made things quite clear. And Eddie just pointed to that. He says, Amanda has commented, the message is out there. It's not my job to brief on these matters, he said. Getting a bit aerated, I felt, at that point, but still quite cool and calm. But you could tell, going down that avenue wasn't great. Damien then asked about, do the recent results show, that you need to bridge a gap? There's clearly a gap being bridged, but do you need more players in and spend more money in the transfer window? And he went, yeah, that will be expected in the summer from us. He said, we've closed the gap. I mean, look at where we were last season, 3rd bottom, and at this time of the season, struggling a relegation battle. This season, we've been to a cup final and we're still 5th in the league. He said, we need to close the gap, and we will continue to do that. We need to be more competitive, and we need to improve, and we will improve. So yeah, that was his simple answer to that. Miles was next up from the Shields Gazette. He asked if Anthony Gordon was ready to start. He said, yeah. He said physically he's in a better place. We pride ourselves in fitness, and he is, he's busted a gut really to get to where he is at the moment. He asked him about Ryan Fraser. We announced that yesterday, of course, on one of our short videos. Ryan Fraser is training with the 21s, and Eddie was quite cutting, really. He just said, I want to concentrate on players who are committed to the club. It makes you wonder what's changed, doesn't it, in the last few weeks? Because it's only a few weeks ago in a press conference when he was asked about Ryan Fraser, he said, I can't wait to see him in a black and white shirt. So certainly a big issue there with Ryan Fraser, and sending him to the 21s probably the best bet if he's causing a little bit of disruption in the dressing room. He was asked, has he got a future at the club? And he said, at the moment, I would say no, he doesn't. Craig Hope was next, asking, where has the form gone for Newcastle United? He looked a little bit quizzical, and he said, look, I'm not one to make excuses, but we haven't been clinical in both boxes. He went, for example, West Ham and Bournemouth games. We weren't clinical on set pieces, and we conceded goals, and we only came away with a point when we should have had 3 in both games, and we're not taking chances. He reiterated again that we're not taking chances up front. Craig then said Wilson hasn't looked the same. Would you agree? Since the World Cup, Eddie's not going to single out Wilson. Clearly not. He just said, I need to get all my attacking players in the best moments at the same time, and that's not happened. He said he felt that Callum was electric against West Ham, and he said you could probably say as well that as a team we need to create more chances for the forwards. So quite defensive of Wilson, as you would expect. He's not going to hang him out to dry. Again, Craig pushed with the same kind of line that we've had from a couple of other journalists earlier on in the press conference, saying that the team was outperformed on Sunday to a degree. Is that a reminder that you need investment? I mean, outperformed, 62% possession, but, ultimately possession doesn't win you a game. I think the view of most Newcastle fans that I've spoken to, and those in the chat on this platform, have been, we'll give it a good go. We just couldn't score. I wouldn't say we were outperformed, but it's all about opinions. Difficult for me, said Eddie, to say. He says, my core belief is that you can improve players. So essentially he was saying that, throwing money at it isn't always the solution. And he said there's an element of truth that investment is going to help, of course, but ultimately, he's sticking with his core belief, which is that, with coaching, you can improve the players that you have. And the proof's in the pudding. He's done it with Joe Linton. He's done it with Almiron, 2 players who, we all know were underperforming and ultimately have got better. This season we've got some sterling performances out of both of them. Ian Murtagh from the Daily Star was next. He just said, how relevant for your day-to-day job is it that the ownership is based overseas and that it is a controversial ownership? Does it get in the way of your job? A rather complex way of asking about the Saudi ownership again. Eddie just said, look, all my conversations are about football. They're not political conversations. Simple as that, really. And he was also asked about communication. Do you have communication with people in Saudi and PIF on a regular basis? He did finish his question off by saying, obviously, I know you speak to, certain people at the club and, but just interested in your communication with them. And he said, well, I see Dan a lot because he's at the training ground. I speak to Darren a little bit. He says, I speak to Amanda and Mirdad a lot on the phone. He says, I tend to only meet the people from Saudi when there is board meetings. So it was as simple as that, really. And Luke Edwards, he said, would it be right to say that the cup final was phase 1 coming to an end? And Eddie quite liked the fact that he'd coined that phrase. He agreed that it felt like a bit of a closure. The adventure of the cup was over, and it was time to get back to Premier League action, and to get back to the levels and the performances and the results where we were before this. And again, he'd mentioned earlier that the cup final was a distraction, even though he felt at the time it probably wasn't. It probably was. And from his perspective, he was saying that we want to win each game, and it's hard doing that, and it's sometimes hard getting it over the line. There's going to be dips in form. And he went, again, Luke was asking him about closing the gap. He went, the leap sometimes is hard, and time is a small commodity as a manager, and we've got high hopes and expectations, but time does pass you by as a manager. It wasn't as cryptic as I made that sound, to be fair, but it was, he agreed that it was the end of phase one, and now it's time to focus on league action, and getting that place in Europe would be massive, I guess, for Newcastle, whichever competition it's in. Luke again reiterated what others had said. Has recent form and results, shown that you need a deeper, more varied squad. Eddie played it down a bit. He just said, I don't want to say that we need to spend a small fortune, but we do need a bigger squad. He said, we need to do it wisely. We need to do it smartly. And we also need to coach the people who are here and work with them and improve them. So, again, just a roundabout way of giving the same answer he'd given earlier. Lee Ryder said, looking at the Manchester United team, Casemiro and Rashford were top players for them. Obviously, the goal scorers on the day. Is experienced players at this level the next step for you in the transfer window? And he went, yes, those types of players would be nice, but he felt that they were unattainable at this moment in time. He said it's difficult for us. And again, the thoughts of financial fair play rearing their head, I guess, is always in the back of his mind. Lee then asked him what would represent success now, a successful season now. Have the stakes been raised? He said. Obviously, we're getting to the cup final, and being in a Champions League position for so long. Eddie said, I'm not going to set a target for the rest of the season. We'll just keep doing our job and seeing what happens. And Lee then said, well, are you looking at this as a 15 game season, like at the start of a second half of the season, which is the same as what Luke Edwards asked. And he said, yeah, look, as Luke said, stage one, cup's over. Let's see what we can do. Lee then asked, are you seeing the away games as a chance for success? And what he meant by that was, you've got away games at, say, West Ham, Chelsea, and you go there, you get results. That's what your season is. That's where your season's going to be, better or worse. You win your away games, you're going to finish higher up the table. I guess is what he was going to say. You're going to be focused more on that. And he went, look, we want wins at home and away. He says, and home for us is critical. Our home form is vital to maintain, a good home performance. Getting results at home is a strong foundation. So yeah, it was a confusing question, really. I thought Lee did well in the press conference. I just thought that was quite a confusing question. You clearly want to win every game you play. He was asking whether the Manchester City game today would be a game where maybe Newcastle might park the bus. Eddie just said there's many ways to approach the game. He went, I'm not sure that's the way. That way is our way. But he says in a game you need all the hats and tools that you can use, and we'll just see how the game develops. Dom was next. Again, going back to this Saudi story, saying that Amnesty International have called for the re-examination of the takeover at Newcastle. He got short shrift. He just said, I'm not the right person to ask. Dom then decided to annoy him even more by saying, did you speak about separation between PIF and the Saudi state when you took the job? And he went, no, I didn't ask about it. So, again, quite clear when you hear some of the journalists at the start asking about, that, and hear what his answer is going to be, that he's not going to answer the question. So I don't know why you waste a question later on in the press conference for the same thing. He's not going to change his tune. Dom finished with a football-related question, much to the delight of Eddie. And he said, Isaac, what's his best position? He gave an in-depth answer, just essentially saying, he's a flexible player. He's an adaptable player. I can see him as an outright 9. I can see him, out wide. But it's the reason we spent the money on him. It's the reason we bought him, because he's not a one-trick pony, more or less. He's somebody who essentially can bring something to the team and can be adaptable. So that was that. Jordan Cronin was next. He just asked, is there any more new contracts in the offing? He says, obviously, we've seen in recent weeks, Trippier and Miggy. There has been rumours about Bruno signing a new contract. Is there any announcements planned? And he went, none that I can think of. So simple answer to a simple question. And he also was asked about the analyst who's leaving Newcastle to go to Manchester City, and was that disappointing? And he went, it's always disappointing when you lose key members. He says, good football clubs are always looking for good people to work at them. We're always looking for elite members to join our staff, but he goes with our best wishes. Jordan also asked about the players such as Miggy and Trippier who had been given new contracts, and what kind of discussions has he had with them, and it must be a buzz for them, knowing that they're going to help build the future of the club. And he said, look, lots go into these kind of discussions. We want players with the right attitude and right characters. He says, and Miggy and Trips are both team players and bring a lot to the dressing room as well as bring a lot to the pitch. So you need the right foundations when you're building a team. Chris was next up, and he just said, he quoted Amanda saying that the financial fair play is obviously something that restricts them, but they've kept within the guidelines, etc. And that the documentary that has been filmed by Amazon, the 4-part documentary, which will come out at the end of the season, is part of that. It raises the profile, and it helps commercial revenue, etc. Chris asked if Eddie had to adapt certain things that he would normally do with the cameras coming in, and he'd say, and did it bother him that the cameras were there? And he just said, look, it would be foolish for me to say the cameras can't come in. He said, he says, you can just imagine the scenario, in the summer, me going and asking for X amount of money for players, and them saying, well, we can't give you knock that TV documentary back. And he laughed about it. He said, the inner workings of a football club are very delicate. He says, I do like privacy for certain things. And he says, certain things shouldn't escape these walls. But sometimes they do. But he said, it's, it's one of those things. He said, I've got used to the cameras, and he says, from my perspective, it's, something we've enjoyed this season. So yeah, it hasn't been as bad an experience as I thought it would be. Kieran was next up and just said, look, there's so much to play for. Is that the message you're getting across to the players? And went, yeah, look, absolutely. He says that every training session is important, every game is important, and it's certainly important for long-term futures. He said, we want to take a core group with us on this journey, but he says, as always happens in football, some will fall off the journey, and that's the way it's going to be. He also said there'll be some emotional decisions, and he went, I've done that many times. It's always the case, teams in football change very quickly. The turnover's high. So yeah, he's prepared for it. He knows it's going to happen. And ultimately, he realizes that's just part of football. Louise Taylor was next. She was asking whether Man City was a template with the owners. And he went, no, look, we respect what they've done. The success that they've had has been great. But again, we haven't got any knowledge of what they've done behind the scenes. So it's not a template for us. She asked if the documentary had impeded on his home life, and he went, I'm not aware that they followed me home. He says, maybe my sense of awareness has dropped off if they have, but he says, no, he says that they haven't followed me home. He says, so he had a little laugh about that. And she also asked about his tactics, and she said your tactics have been quite conservative. You haven't changed a great deal. Are you thinking about ripping it up and, you know, going for a different formation? Or would you see that as panicking? And he just said, look, tactically, I'm open. He says, we changed in the second half versus Manchester United at Wembley. He said, and I think there was some good bits from that, but there was also some not so good bits. He says, ultimately, though, I do believe in a settled team. So I think that's a pointer, really. I think most of us have been discussing this week, is there going to be big changes to the team today? Is Target going to come in for Burn at left back? Is Anthony Gordon going to come in for ASM? Is Wilson going to be dropped and bring Isaac in? Or is Miggy going to be dropped and, you know, Isaac plays on the right? You just, you know, there's so many permutations as to what could happen. You know, he could drop Shaw and put Burn into centre half with Botman and play Target left back. We don't know. That's the beauty of it. But the impression I got from that answer from Eddie was there's not going to be massive changes. People will have to earn their place. Depends what's happened in training. Martin was last. He said discussions on the summer window have they started. He went, we've had some basic conversations, but ultimately, you know, nothing major. He was asked if he was confident about the window, and, you know, again, just he batted it off. He can't really see anything at this moment in time. It's not here yet. He was asked if the financial fair play was a hamstring to what he wanted to do. Short term, he went, yeah, it's a big issue, but, you know, moving forward with commercial revenue coming in, it'll change. Again, he was just asked about, you know, meetings after the final with players, and did you get the group together? And he went, yeah, we had a group meeting, and we've also had individual meetings to get rid of the sadness, as he called it. Martin said, well, has that worked? And he went, yeah, I believe it has, but I'll be able to tell you more after today's session, which of course, you know, was yesterday. We'll just have to wait and see. I guess the proof of the pudding is in the eating, as they say. All right. Morning to Les, morning to Doug, morning to Tom, and morning to Kirk. He said the Delaney stuff is nothing. Is a nothing burger. Louise Taylor hit the nail on the head. It was a good article by Louise, actually, calling out the journalist as disingenuous and opportunistic. Still would not trust Taylor too, though. No, me neither, Kirk, but it was a good article, that. Okay, I'm going to shoot off. 12:30 is the kickoff today, so we will be back at 12:15 for Match Day Live. I hope you can join us. I'm going to play out with the ads. See you at 12:15. A big thanks to all our sponsors, Skips and Bins. You can find them at skipsandbins.com. Telephone 0800 25 45 25 3. Email inquiries at skipsandbins.com. Easy contract, free and pay as you go, waste collection. Thanks to Mr. Vicky's sauces, which are handmade in Cumbria. You can order them from mrvickies.co.uk or by calling 01768 210 102. Welcome aboard to Fruy Vita Getaways. You can email them at fruivitagetaways@gmail.com. Call or text them 0792 842 7895. Please join and share their Facebook group as well at Fruy Vita Getaways. Book your holidays or short breaks in the UK or around the world with them. Let them find your happy place. ABTA and ATOL registered. Thanks to Media Arts for all the help with the video side of things. And thanks to qtechshop.co.uk, the makers of pool tables and snooker tables in Wallsend, Newcastle. And the guys who run our website, NUFCmatters.com, where you can buy lots of t-shirts and merchandise. If you want to subscribe to the show, hit the subscribe button underneath this video today. It is free to do so. Hit the thumb up to like the video. It's good for the algorithm. And click share to your other social media. If you do subscribe, we do send you a free car sticker. To get that, email john@nufcmatters.com and he'll post you one out. If you want to join the NUFC Matters cult, then put your smartphone over this QR code now and it will take you straight there. Alternatively, go to the website, nufcmatters.com, and you can join for a one-off payment of £25. You'll receive a cup, a pen, a membership card, and a scarf, and entry into the monthly draw. You can also join via YouTube. And if you click join beneath the video, you will see a variety of prices and how you can support the channel. You can alternatively make a donation with a super chat in the chat tonight. Just click the $sign. We're also available on iTunes and Spotify and other podcast providers. We also help the food bank on this show. NUFC fans, foodbank.co.uk is where you'll find the matchday bucket, and you can make a virtual donation 365 days of the year. As always, we've got a whole host of events coming up throughout the year. An evening with Nobby Solano takes place on Saturday the 25th of March at the Tyneside Irish Centre. Tickets £15. Book now at nufcmatters.com. An evening with Peter Beardsley at Leamington Labour Club. Tickets are £20. 31st of March. And you can get them direct from the venue. An evening with Nobby Solano. Good Friday, the 7th of April at 4 p.m. Tickets are a tenner and available behind the bar at Felling Cricket Club in Gateshead. An evening with Supermac, hosted by Gibbo at the Tynemouth Surf Cafe, Tuesday the 11th of April. And tickets direct from the venue. This is a limited ticket event, only 35 tickets available, so book soon. And an evening with Frank Clark and John Gibson, Thursday the 20th of April. Tickets are £15. Book now at nufcmatters.com. In June, Rob Lee will be at Louis Liquor Store in Newcastle, and you can get tickets direct from the venue. And an evening with Rob Lee, Lee Clark, John Beresford takes place the following evening, Friday the 2nd of June at the Grand Hotel in Gosforth. This is in aid of the Heel and Toe charity, and tickets are available from their website, www.heelandtoe.org.uk/events. And if you're a boxing fan, the Night of Champions comes to Gateshead at the Fed. Frank Bruno, Ricky Hatton, Nigel Benn and Joe Calzaghe are part of the UK tour, and you can get your tickets from www.goldstarpromotions.co.uk.